It is February 1959. 9 experienced hikers vanish into the frozen wilderness of Soviet Russia. When rescuers finally find their tent, it's slashed open from the inside. Their bodies are scattered across the snow, barefoot, half naked, some with crushed ribs and one missing their tongue. There's no clear or easy explanation. And for over 60 years, what happened that night has remained one of the most chilling, unresolved mysteries, fascinating many, including myself. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In the depths of the Ural Mountains, on the edge of Siberia, lies a remote and unforgiving stretch of wilderness. It's a place of brutal cold with sweeping winds and endless silence. The indigenous Mansi people call it Kolat Shiachl, which translates to the Dead Mountain. It's a place rarely visited in the heart of winter, where temperatures plummet below minus 30 degrees Celsius or minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, and even experienced explorers avoid venturing too far. But in January of 1959, a group of 10 young Soviet hikers, all students or recent graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, set out on a ski trek into these mountains. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten. That's a 350-kilometer or 217 miles journey through deep snow, temperatures well below freezing, and complete isolation. All members were highly experienced and certified in extreme conditions, as well trained in survival and familiar with the landscape. But only one of them would return. One member that fell ill early in the expedition and turned back. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg. He was calm, methodical, and highly respected by his peers. Dyatlov had organized the trek as part of a qualification process for the highest level of Soviet hiking certification, the Category 3, the most demanding level available at the time. According to Soviet sports regulations, Category 3 hike required a route of over 300 kilometers or 186 miles through severe and remote terrain. The team would have to demonstrate advanced survival skills, map reading, cold weather camping, and physical endurance. And importantly, they had to keep meticulous documentation, including journals and photographs, as proof of their compliance and skill. The team was composed of 9 other students and graduates, all experienced hikers. Most were in their early 20s. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old, was studying engineering and known for her fierce determination. She had once been shot during a previous expedition and then continued hiking. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22 years old, cheerful and optimistic, was beloved by the group. She had a natural talent for leadership and was close to Dyatlov. Yuri Doroshenko, 21 years old, tall and strong, had once fought off a bear with a geologist's hammer. He had a fearless trek and unmatched endurance. Rustem Slobodin, 23 years old, was a quiet thinker with a degree in mechanical engineering and a passion for long-distance skiing. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23, of French descent, was easygoing and athletic with a background in civil engineering. Alexander Kolevatov, 24, had worked in Siberia as a physicist and was known for his intellect and calm demeanor. Yuri Krivonishchenko, 24, was eccentric and humorous, once having worked at the Mayak nuclear plant during the Kishtim disaster. He often carried a mandolin to lift spirits. And Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, was the outlier, a veteran of World War II, a certified ski instructor, and a mysterious late addition to the group, replacing another hiker who had dropped out. He rarely spoke of his wartime experiences and kept his past close to the chest. The final member was Yuri Yudin, 21. He was forced to turn back on the second day due to sciatica, an injury that likely saved his life. The team departed from Sverdlovsk by train on January 23, 1959. Their route to their final destination in Mount Otorten would cut through dense forest, frozen rivers, and eventually steep, exposed slopes. Their base city was Ivdel, a small isolated settlement that served as a jumping-off point for lodging operation and occasional expeditions. From there, they rode a lumber truck to the village of Vishai, which was the last inhabited outpost before the wilderness swallowed them. The region was inhabited sparsely by the Mansi people, an indigenous reindeer herding community who revered the mountains and considered certain areas sacred. Their oral traditions warned of cursed peaks and restless spirits. To outsiders, these were only superstitions. But to the Mansi, the mountains were alive. The Dyatlov group began their trek on January 27, 1959, after taking a train from Sverdlov to Ivdel, then a truck to Vishai, the last inhabited settlement before entering in the northern Ural mountains. They registered with the local athletic committee and began skiing toward Mount Otorten, following a route planned to take about 2 weeks. From Vishai, they moved through dense taiga forest, traveling north along the Lozva River. They kept journals, and several group members took photos daily, capturing both landscapes and personal moments. The first few days were uneventful. They built firewood shelters, crossed small frozen rivers, and made steady progress. Except on January 28, Yuri Yudin turned back due to joint pain and illness. The rest of the group continued toward their target destination. As they left the forest and gained elevation, the terrain grew more demanding. Weather conditions worsened and temperatures dropped, and wind speeds increased. Despite the difficulty, their diaries remained positive and showed they joked about sore muscles, minor injuries, and their cooking mishaps. There were no signs of tension within the group. By January 31st, they reached the edge of a highland area near the base of Kolatshyakhl. They stored surplus food and equipment in a cache on a wooded ridge for their return trip, which is a common safety practice. From that point, they began to ascend toward the mountain. On February 1st, visibility was poor, and navigation became difficult due to strong wind and snow. Instead of descending into a forested valley where they had originally planned to camp, which would have provided more shelter, they stopped on an exposed slope approximately 9.5 kilometers or 6 miles from Mount Otorten. They set up their tent on a flat patch of snow at an elevation of around 1,070 meters or 3,500 feet. It was an unusual decision, given the harsh wind exposure and lack of natural protection. One possibility, noted later in the investigation, was that they lost daylight and chose to camp there to avoid losing altitude that they had already gained. Photos taken that day show them digging into the snow, setting out the tent, and preparing a basic meal. They recorded their position and condition in their hiking log. There is no indication of any conflict, illness, or disturbance. Their last known diary entry was calm and matter-of-fact. At this point, the group was slightly behind schedule, but not dangerously so. They were isolated with over 100 kilometers or 62 miles from the nearest settlement, but still on track for a standard winter expedition. The decision to camp on the exposed slope marked their last documented action. The Dyatlov group was expected to return to the city of Sverdlovsk and send a telegram by February 12, 1959. When no message arrived, neither the university nor the families were initially alarmed, as delays were common in winter expeditions due to weather or terrain. However, by February 17, after 5 days of silence, the Ural Polytechnic Institute and family members began raising concerns. On February 20, a formal search operation was launched. The first search teams were composed of volunteer students, faculty, and local hikers. As the situation became more serious, military personnel, police, and Mansi hunters joined the operation. Helicopters and aircraft were brought in for aerial reconnaissance, and the ground team used search dogs and skis to cover large areas of terrain. Weather conditions during the search were severe. Temperatures dropped as low as minus 30 degrees Celsius or minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, with strong winds and heavy snowfall complicating visibility and slowing progress. On February 26, after 6 days of searching the region near Kolatshyakhl, the searchers located the group's tent on the eastern slope of a mountain. It was half buried in snow. Investigators noted that the fabric had been slashed from the inside, with most of the group's boots, coats, and gear still inside. There were no signs of struggle, and food had been partially prepared. Footprints made by bare or socked feet were found leading downhill toward the forest, spaced and orderly, not indicative of a panicked run. These tracks disappeared after about 500 meters. Roughly 1.5 kilometers or 1 mile downslope, at the edge of the forest near a cedar tree, the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishchenko were discovered. They were barefoot and dressed only in underclothes, lying beside the remains of a small fire. The bark of the cedar tree above them was broken up to 5 meters high, and their hands were burned, possibly from contact with flames or attempts to climb the tree. Between the cedar and the tent, the bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin were found spaced at intervals, as if they had tried to crawl back uphill. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but no other major injuries were apparent. It wasn't until May 5th, after significant snowmelt, that the remaining 4 hikers were found. Their bodies were discovered in a ravine 75 meters or 246 feet deeper into the forest, under 4 meters or 13 feet of snow. These individuals were more fully clothed, with some garments apparently taken from others, indicating that at least some had survived longer. The autopsy findings were unusual. Thibaut Brignol had a crushed skull with massive internal damage. Zolotaryov and Dubinina both had multiple fractured ribs. Dubinina was also missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Despite the severity of the internal trauma, there were no external soft tissue injuries consistent with blunt force violence. The medical examiner noted that the injuries resembled those seen in high-impact accidents, such as car crashes or explosion, but without corresponding surface wounds. There were no signs of defensive wounds, animal activity, or human confrontation. The pattern of injuries was inconsistent across the group. In the following weeks, several theories were proposed. An avalanche forcing them to evacuate the tent, leading to hypothermia and injury. However, the tent was still standing and snow levels and terrain didn't support a large slide. Paradoxical undressing, a symptom of hypothermia in which victims remove clothing due to nerve misfiring. This was considered a contributing factor, but not a complete explanation. An attack of the local Mansi people was considered and ruled out early as there were no signs of a struggle, and the Mansi had actively assisted in the search. Some evidence of radiation was found on a few of the hiker clothing, but the source was unclear. The official investigation concluded in May 1959. The report cited the cause of death as exposure in a compelling natural force without further clarification. The area was restricted for several years, and details of the case were classified during the Soviet era. The investigation's lack of transparency and the strange conditions of the bodies led to decades of speculation. However, at this stage, the case remained officially closed. In the absence of a definitive explanation, various theories began to circulate, some grounded in science, others in speculation. Over the decades, multiple reinvestigations were conducted and new information emerged. One of the earliest and most widely discussed theories was that of an avalanche. It proposed that snow piled above the tent collapsed, either crushing part of the group or forcing them to evacuate quickly in darkness and extreme cold. However, several inconsistencies challenged this theory. The tent was still standing and was not buried. The slope angle was below the typical threshold for slab avalanches. The footprint trail showed a calm departure, not the chaotic fleeing expected in an avalanche scenario. In 2019, a Russian government-led investigation reopened the case. In 2020, their final report returned to the slab avalanche theory, bolstered by a new scientific model published by Swiss researchers. They demonstrated how a small, delayed slab release could have occurred due to the accumulation of snow above the tent. This event could have caused trauma to some members and panic in the group, prompting a rapid exit. While it answered some questions, critics pointed out that the severity and patterns of injuries, especially to Ludmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov, still lacked a fully plausible explanation under this model. Another supported explanation involved katabatic winds, sudden, violent gusts of cold air that rushed down slope. These winds can disorient and endanger hikers in exposed location. According to this theory, the group may have fled the tent to avoid it collapsing under pressure or to seek safety in the forest. This aligns with the group's choice to descend in socks or barefoot and could account for the separation of bodies. However, like the avalanche theory, it does not explain the crushing internal injuries seen in the last four bodies. In 2013, American researcher Donnie Akar introduced the infrasound hypothesis. The theory is based on the Kármán vortex street effect, where wind flowing over the mountain's dome could produce low-frequency sound waves capable of inducing nausea, anxiety, and panic in humans. This could explain the group's seemingly irrational decision to flee into lethal conditions without their gear. However, while intriguing, it remained difficult to prove retroactively and does not explain physical trauma. The military testing theory is based on speculation that the group may have stumbled upon secret Soviet weapons experiments. Proponents cite unexplained traces of radiation on some clothing, reports of orange orbs in the sky seen by locals, and the classified nature of some case files. However, later analysis showed that the radiation levels were not above acceptable limits for civilian clothing. Furthermore, there was no physical evidence of explosives, munitions, or chemical exposure at the site. The suggestion of a Mansi attack was quickly ruled out during the initial investigation. There was no evidence of confrontation, and the Mansi community actively helped in the search effort. There were also no defensive wounds or signs of hand-to-hand conflict. Other proposals, including theories involving animal attacks, hallucinations, or even UFOs, have been raised over the years, often without factual support. The most consistent view among recent experts is that no single factor explains the tragedy. Rather, it is likely resulted from a convergence of physical and environmental stressors, poor visibility, and rapid decision-making under extreme duress. After the case was officially closed in May 1959, the area around Dyatlov Pass remained restricted for several years. Soviet authorities imposed travel bans in the region, citing safety concerns. Many of the case's files, photographs, and autopsy reports were archived and remained inaccessible to the public for decades. The families of the deceased received minimal explanation. Most were informed that their children had died from exposure due to extreme weather. Some parents attempted to appeal for more answers, but the matter was considered closed by state authorities. In academic and hiking communities, the case became an object of interest and caution. Despite the Soviet government's effort to suppress details, summaries of the event began to circulate among mountaineers and students. It wasn't until the 1990s, after the collapse of the USSR, that previously classified documents were gradually released to the public. By the 2000s, international researchers, journalists, and independent investigators began revisiting the case. Translations of the original documents, photos from the scene, and survivor interviews from Yuri Yudin, the lone member who turned back, helped provide additional context. Public interest intensified globally. There were books, documentaries, and podcasts that explored various theories, ranging from natural disasters to military experiments and psychological breakdown. Some were based on credible forensic work, while others relied on speculative or fringe explanation. In 2019, the Russian Prosecutor General's office reopened the case, citing public demand and scientific curiosity. Their findings, released in 2020, reaffirmed the natural cause, most likely a small slab avalanche combined with disorientation hypothermia. They concluded that the group had made rational decisions under rapidly deteriorating conditions, and the physical injuries could be explained by falls into deep snow and terrain features like hidden rocks or ravines. Still, the official explanation did not resolve all aspects of the case. Critics continue to question why certain injuries appeared inconsistent with hypothermia or plant trauma alone, why the group camped in an exposed location, why their behavior, while perhaps explainable by cold, was so uniform in urgency and direction. Some of these questions may never be fully answered due to the state of the remains, the time elapsed, and the limited forensic techniques available at the time. Despite the uncertainty, the Dyatlov Pass incident has had a lasting impact. It led to increased scrutiny in winter expedition protocols, improvements in mountain rescue coordination, and changes in how traumatic injuries are assessed in cold weather environments. Today, a memorial stone stands near the pass, honoring the 9 hikers. In 2008, the Ural mountain region officially renamed the previous unnamed pass as Dyatlov Pass in recognition of the event. More than 6 decades later, the story remains a prominent case study in survival, human behavior under stress, and the unpredictability of nature. It continues to be taught in university courses, cited in forensic and psychological literature, and discussed in both scientific and public forums. While modern investigation has brought us closer to the truth, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains, in part, unresolved. Not due to a lack of evidence, but because of the complexity of what happened that night in the mountains. The Dyatlov Pass incident is no longer just a story about 9 hikers. It has become a benchmark in the study of unexplained deaths, mountain safety, and the way we interpret events shaped by extreme environments. While many facts are now known, the case still evokes questions, some scientific, some human. If you found this investigation informative, consider subscribing for more documentary-style breakdowns of real stories that continue to challenge our understanding of the world. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.